Mesachet Bava Batra is Daf Yud Bet, Daf 12. And we yesterday got up to the bottom. There's 2 dots in my Gemara, at least 5 lines from the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Bet. Amar Mar, right? So we had a case before. We quoted a Braita which said, Haya Satum Ubikesh Putcho. Remember, the case here was where a person had a house that opened to a mavoy, opened to a street, but the back of his house or other portion of the house with the chatzer around the house opened or had an opening to another street that was the different street, and they had closed it up. So we said before that if you can't open up a new entranceway without permission from the name of void, because you'll be increasing their traffic and their garbage and everything that they don't want. But if you had a previous door there and you sealed up the door, then they can't stop you, because once there was a door, even if you weren't using it, you can reuse it over time. So says the Gemara, says Mar, Hayasatum, if the door was closed up, and you wanted to reopen this doorway, Ein b'nei mavoy yecholim me'akvin alav. The people of the mavoy, the new mavoy, cannot stop you from doing that. Amar Rava, and says Rava, but that's not always the case. Says Rava, that's only if you didn't uproot the doorpost, meaning when you make a door in a wall, of course, so you can't just open up holes in the wall, it'll fall apart. Do you have to put a mantle and a lintel and all the parts around it? Tell me if you guys lost me. It says my internet was unstable. But so basically you have to have support beams around the door. So you can, we've all seen this, right? You can just paste over a door, but not interfere with the archway. But if you actually removed the archway, removed the whole area around the door, that's the pitzimav, then you basically got rid of that door, and you no longer get the status of having a door there. Aval paratzet pitzimav, says Rava, 2 lines in the bottom, b'nei mavoy makvin alav, then they can stop you, because essentially you undid the door, right? You knocked out the base of the door, not the base, but the support, and therefore there's no door, and if you want to reinstitute a door, you got to get permission. Amar le Abaya the Rava. Now Abaya, his friend, said to Rava, Tanya de Mesayelach. In fact, there's a Braita that supports what you said. The Braita in the end of Shabbat, top of Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Bayit Satum Yeshlo Arba'a Amot. This is a discussion about when you split up a chatzer, right?
Is this when he's breaking open? Now he's opening this doorway that had been there previously, but sealed. Now he breaks it open and he breaks the doorpost. Then you can't use it?
No, if when he sealed up the door, he sealed it up in such a way that he removed the doorpost and he made a regular wall. So basically he removed any trace of the door, then he can't say, 20 years ago, I have pictures from the archives that my father had a door here. I want to reopen that door. It's too late. Because once you uproot the pitzimim, you got rid of the status of the door.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's what the Braita says on the top of Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, the first words, Bayit Satum, Yeshlo Arba Amot. If you have a house, remember we said yesterday, if you have a house and you get a chatzer, every doorway gets you 4 amot. Even if the doorway is sealed off, the fact that the doorway was there, was an existing doorway, even if it's not used anymore, you get 4 amot in front of that door because it doesn't lose its status. But if you're paratzet pitzimav, if you uproot the posts, the mantle and the posts around the door, then it's not a door. And ein lo arba amot, you don't get the 4 amot. We'll skip the next two lines because it's in parentheses. You'll see why. Bayit satum. There's a very interesting halacha in Taharot. I don't know if Charlie gave it to Taharot yet. But there's a very interesting halacha that a house that has a dead body inside of it, there's a halacha, well, let's put it this way, that if there's a doorway in that house, that in front of that doorway is tamei for 4 amot, because you assume that the meat is going to go out through that doorway. But if it's a house which has no doorways, then actually the whole house, everything's tamei for amot around the house, because you don't know where the meat is going to come out from. So that's the case here, let's just say. Bayit satum.
Goes out the window.
If there's a window, you can go out the window, correct. But it's hard to go out the window. But we're assuming if it's a sealed house, again, this is tarot, that you're going to break down an opening in the house to get this body out. The question is, we don't know where you're going to break it open. But if there's a doorway, we assume you're going to go through the door. Okay, so it says the Braita, Bayit Satum, if the house had a doorway and the doorway is sealed up, then Eino Mitamei Kol Svivav. Then you are not Mitamei all around the house, only in front of that door, even though it's not a functional doorway. But if you're paratzet pitzimav, but if you uproot the support beams from around that door frame, then if no doorway there, and then mitamei kol svivav, the house is mitamei all around it because there's no way for the tumah to go out. Remember, this is called sof tumah latzet. It's the derech that the tumah is eventually going to leave.
What about the
Amar,
kever shepitchu satum? We didn't read that.
because the Bach takes it out. I don't know if you have in parentheses in yours, but it's in parentheses in mine.
No parentheses.
So it should remove those words, those two lines. They don't make a lot of sense. Amar Rabba bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rabba bar Chana bar Rabbi Yochanan, another halacha in terms of mivoot. Remember, a mavoy, hopefully we all have our geography. You have a houses that open to a chatzer, chatzerot potentially open to a mavoy opens to Reshut Rabim. Okay, says Rabbi bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, mivoot amufulashot li'ir acheret. Let's say you have a mavoy that has an opening on one end that is a direct road to Damascus. I'm just picking an example there, right? Meaning it's not opening to that city, but it's the best way to go. You can cut through, and that's the road to, Derech Hebron, whatever it might be, right? And Bikshu Bnei Yair l'sotmam. And the people in the city say, we're enough with this traffic. People keep cutting through. This happens in ways all the time, right? People keep cutting through our neighborhood to get to the highway. We want to block off the opening, so make it a one-way street or a dead end. Says the Braita, very fascinating. Says Rabbi Barchan, sorry. B'nei oto ir makvin alehem. The people of the other city can say, stop. This is the way we get home. We need to use your mavoy. It's already been in existence. You can't stop us from using it. Says the Gemara, now, lo mi boy kileka darka achrini. Certainly, we didn't have any question that this is true when there's no other way to get to the city, right? This is the only road in, that you can't block it, that they can stop them from blocking the street. Even if there is another road, and it might be a few minutes longer or just a little bit less convenient, kinami ma'akfi, the people can say you can't block off our street. Mishum, not our street, we can't block off your street, right, that we use to get to our house. Mishum Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda Marav, because Rav Yehuda Marav was famously said, matzar. A matzar means like a boundary, literally means a highway in this case. The matzar is a border sometimes, but here it means a road that you travel on. Shechziku bo rabim, that the public have started using as their way of travel. Asur the kalkalo, you're not allowed to ruin it. So you can't say, look, there's this path next to my field, and all of a sudden, 500 people a day are using it because Waze is sending them this way. I'm going to set up roadblocks, or I'm going to interfere with it, or I'm going to ruin the field. You're not allowed to do that. Once something was used by the Rabbim, Tosfos points out it has to be that they used it legally, right? Once something was used legally by the Rabbim, they get a chazakah. It's a social justice, not social justice, a social good, I would say, that you basically allow the public to continue using what they used previously. Amar of Anan Amar
Wait,
Shmuel.
you're saying, did you skip other lines? Because it says here, Uvikshu b'nei ha'ir l'sotmo, b'nei ota ha'ir makvin alayam, that they can block it off. And you say,
No. The people in the city, the people in the Mavoy want to block it. The people of the other city where the road goes to can stop the people of the Mavoy from blocking it. It's a double negative. So they can be they want to block it. The other people can stop them from blocking it. So they are not allowed to block it.
oh, the other people.
Yeah, the Bnei Oto Ha'ir, the people of that other city. And the Gemara explains it's not just if that's the only way for them to get home that they can say you can't block the road. Even if they have other ways, once it's been used by the public, it is considered to be sort of public permission. And again, I'm taking out the next lines because the Bach takes them out. Amar Rav Anan Amar Shmuel. Said Rav Anan Amar Shmuel, Mevo'otam Fulashim L'Shut Rabim. Let's say you have a mavoy. This is a little bit of a different case than what mavoy mefulash usually means. It just meant that you can travel through the mavoy, meaning it's open end to end. Here, it doesn't mean that. Here, it means that the mavoy is open to the Reshut Rabim, which is very typical. But, obviously there are times where you have a mavoy, you have a street that goes into a public street that is done in a way that's very difficult to enter. Like there's, what do you call the bollards that you put there, or other things that make it hard to get in. Here, it means that it's wide open. So basically, there's a main street, say, I don't know, Main Street. And coming off Main Street is this mavoy that's wide open to the main street. Okay. Now, what would happen is that at times when Main Street became backed up because of the 4th of July parade or something, the traffic, the animals and the people would go and overflow into the side streets, right? So although they weren't going anywhere in the side streets, there would be space for people to go when the main street got filled up. So that's considered to be the public use. So says Rav Anan Amar Shmuel, you have a mavoy that's wide open on one end, not through and through, but on one end to Reshut Rabim. People in the mavoy are like, enough of this traffic, enough of this animals coming in and this dirt and these kids and the balls. Let's put up doors and we'll block everyone from coming in. We'll have a gate, right? A lot of people want to do that. Says Rav Anan, B'nei Reshut Rabim makvin aleihem. the people in Reshut Rabim can stop them because although it's private property, it's adjacent to the public property and it's common for the public to fall into that space when they need to. So therefore, you can't actually put up a door if there wasn't one when you started. Savor Mina, now they thought that when Rav Anan and Amr Shmuel said that was Hani Milib Arba Amot, that means within 4 Amot of the Reshut Rabim, meaning the Reshut Rabim extends for a sort of standard period of 4 Amot into the Reshut HaYachid, into the Mavoy. And that's like Rabbi Zera, Amr of Nachman. The Amr of Zera, Amr of Nachman, Arba Amot Asmuchot to Reshut Rabim, Reshut Rabim Damit. Rav Nachman was quoted in Rabbi Zera saying that when you have 4 Amot close to Reshut Rabim, you treat them like Reshut Rabim. Now, this halacha that Rav Nachman was said is a totally different context. It refers to Tum'ah. If you recall, in Masechet Sota, we learned, it was a long time ago by now, that when you have a Safek Tum'ah, meaning you don't know if something is Tameh or not, there's 50-50, let's say, if it's in Reshut HaYachid, it is Tameh. If it's in Reshut HaRabim, if it's in a public space, then it's Tahar. And we learned that from Sota because she was Tameh in private, not in public. So basically, the question is, let's say you find a piece of meat or something, I don't know, something on the ground that's in the Mavoy, which is a Reshut HaYachid. Is it considered to be Tameh or not Tameh? And Rav Nachman said that as long as it's within 4 Amot of Reshut HaRabim, it has a halacha like the Reshut HaRabim. Meaning the status of Reshut HaRabim extends out 4 Amot into the Mavoy. So we thought that's what we meant here in terms of traffic, that you get 4 Amot in the Mavoy that is still owned, so to speak. You can't block off from the Reshut HaRabim. That's what they thought to say.
So is it Tameh or not?
No, in Reshut HaRabim, you're Tahar. Safek Tumaz, Reshut HaRabim is Tahar.
So they find that piece of meat 4 Amot away, it's still Tahor?
If it's more than 4 Amot for Reshut HaRabim, it would be considered like a Safek Tumah or Reshut HaYachid, again, which usually would be Tameh if it's Reshut HaYachid. But it's a little complicated. But says Gemara, those things it's not comparable here. That Tuma is not comparable to traffic in Reshut HaRabim, Velohi, because Hatam Inyan Tuma. There, he's talking with Nachman, or Zeram, or Nachman is talking about Tuma. And therefore, it depends on the status. Is it in the Reshut Rabim? Is it in the Reshut HaYachid? How do you view it? Aval Hachab, the issue here is that this Mavoy serves a public function. And the public function is Zimnin, the Dachiki b'nei Reshut Rabim. There's times where the Reshut Rabim becomes very crowded. Right? There's a huge crowd traveling. There's a big event. It's a holiday, whatever it might be. And you have overflow traffic. And then Aili Tuva. And then people can go very far. Aili Tuva means they go very far into the Mavoy. The traffic might back up, not just 4 Amot. It could go 20 Amot into the Mavoy. And therefore, because even if it's once a year or 5 times a year, there's a public need. And once that's established, you can't undo it without permission from the public, which of course you can't get in this case. So that is the halacha of Rav Nachman. Of Rav Anan Amar Shmuel. Continue the Mishnah. Now back to our Mishnah. Remember, we're talking about here where two, I kept using the case of brothers because it's a much easier case. 2 brothers inherit property from their father, but their father did not designate how to split it up, right? So we said if it was a chatzer, they can only be forced to split it up if there's 4 amot besides the doors for each person. And then we said, v'lo et hasadeh, you don't force them to split up a field. 9 kav of planting for each one. And a kav, remember, is a measure of measure of seeds. So 9 kav of wheat or 9 kav of barley, I guess is what they planted a lot of, saurin for each one, which, let's say it's an acre for each one. I don't know. I picked a number. I don't exactly know. So it says the Gemara v'lo pligi. But remember, the next opinion in the Mishnah was that no, it's half of that, 4.5 kabim, 9 half kabim. Says the Gemara, that is not a machloket. Although we saw many opinions in our Mishnah, they don't argue. The point of our Mishnah is that it's dependent on the locale. It depends on how good your ground is, what you grow there, and how efficient you are. Mar kiatre or mar kiatre. Each one is like their neighborhood. And the limud is that basically you have to leave someone with a field that is significant enough to be a producing field. It might mean something different in Iowa than it means in Riverdale, for example. So it all depends on the neighborhood. And a lot of course, has to do with irrigation and sunlight and quality of the land, etc. The Bavel Mai, now says, well, let's be practical here, right? We're all in Bavel. So let's find out what you do in Bavel. What happens if someone needs to split land here in Babylon? Amr of Yosef, it's Bei Radu Yuma. The principle is the following. It's the amount it takes to hoe. A radu is what do you call it when you plow for a day, meaning you have to hire people to plow your field, right? So you're not going to hire a person to plow a field that takes 3 hours. They're going to charge you for the whole day. So you basically, in order for it to be economical to have a field, it only makes sense to have a field that can be worked in one day. If it takes more than a day, then you have to pay for 2 days. If it's half of that field, you're still going to pay the full day basically of plowing. And whether you're paying or you're hiring the sharim or you're hiring the tools, it's a complicated thing. If you recall, this is going to be very relevant in our Gemara. The custom back then was to plow twice a year. You would plow once at the end of the harvest, right? You'd harvest your land in the summer. Your stuff would sit out, I guess, and then you would harvest in like September, October when you're done. I don't know what time they did, but at the end of the summer, that was considered to be a very difficult plowing because the land is hard because it's been dry all summer. And then you would harvest again in the spring or in the late winter before you planted your crops. And that was considered to be a much easier plowing because it rained all winter and the land is much softer, right? And you already plowed once the year before. So they would plow twice a year. So it has to be economical for you to have a field that you can hire plowers to do one day. Beiraju, that's a minimum shear, 1 day of plowing. Now, says the Gemara, that's great, but obviously 1 day of plowing depends on which plowing you're talking about. Because if you're plowing at the end of the summer,
It's
that's
not going to be equivalent. Well, if it's the ground is hard, it's going to take longer. Then
exactly.
you might want a smaller field then. But
Exactly.
in the spring, you have a larger field.
Problem is you have one field, right? So you can't get one field in the spring and one in the summer. So that's exactly the problem. Says the Gemara, my beiradu yuma. What do you mean 1 day of plowing? That's very naive. You clearly are not a farmer. Yuma zara. If it's a day when you're planting, that's in the spring when it's much softer, that would be a field it would take 2 days to plow that field in the karva in the end of the summer when the ground is harder, right? So like you just said, it might be 1 day, but it's 2 days of the other field. And I'm sorry, it's not exactly 2 days. It's like 1.5 days. Sorry, Trey Yuma Karva Lohavi. It won't be 2 full days. It might be a day and a half, which means you're wasting half a day. Yuma Karva, if you say, okay, the size of a field that would take 1 day to plow in the end of the summer, which let's say is 500 feet of field, right? But that would take much less than 1 day in the spring. Yuma Desara Lohavi. It won't even take a full day in the spring. So you're basically wasting time. Says Gemara, you're right, but in fact, the farmers have dealt with this in certain ways because what they do is, one answer is that Yuma de Karva, what they do is you pick a day of Karva, which remember, Karva is the end of the summer, so it's harder. So it's not that much field, right? The Kariv Vitani. And what you do is, in the spring, basically, you plow it over and you do it like a second time, meaning at the end of the summer, you plow once. That's one full day. In the spring, you have extra time. So what you would do is you would plow the field, you would plant your seeds, and then you would plow it again to work the ground over and keep them, get them all worked up well. So that's why it takes a full day. Yibaidim are the opposite. Yuma Dezara, you're talking about a day of planting, but talking about Bahaduri, sorry, where you also repeat over the field. You do it 2 times. And so therefore, in the spring, it takes 1 day. And in the end of the summer, it takes 2 days, even though we said the ratio is not 1 to 2, it might be 1 to 1.5. But at the end of the summer, you go over the field twice. So basically, if you're a smart farmer, you can figure out a way to use up that whole day. Right? It's like when you rent something for a day, you find many projects to do in order to make that day worth it.
You plow twice at the end of the summer?
Yeah, it's not 2 full plowings, but yeah, it says you repeat it basically.
But that would take longer because the ground is harder.
Yeah, but you already plowed it once in the morning, right? So the second time you go around will be much easier. Next case.
Well, it's a hard ground though.
I understand, but you plowed it yesterday morning, so it's a little softer. Anyways, continues the Gemara Davla. What about if you're giving over Davla, remember, is a well, basically, right? Your father dies and leaves a well. So each son wants a portion of it. So says the Gemara, it's not exactly a well, it might be a water source, right? Where you draw, Davla literally means you draw water from it. Amr of Nachman, Be Dalu Yuma, it's talking about what you can do enough that you can draw enough water to feed a field for a day, a standard size field. So they had a standard size field, whatever it was, a Beit Kor. You need enough water for each son to get water to supply that kind of field. Pardesa, what about a pardes? It's a little bit debatable what a pardes means. We're going to see in a second. It means here maybe grapes, but earlier we talked about pardes meaning maybe vegetables like rimonim. But pardesa, Amar Avua de Shmuel, says Avua de Shmuel in Bavel, of course, bat shloshit kabim, that's planting 3 kabim, which is much less than the open fields of barley that we talked about before, which was 9 kav, right? Tainami hachi, in fact, there's a bright that says, Homer lechavero, if a person goes to his friend and says, Manat kerem ani sell you a portion in my vineyard. for $10,000. And the guy says, sure. And he gives him money. And they go to figure out what's a portion in a vineyard. What does that mean? So Sumchas Omer, a minimum size, a minimum size vineyard, like Avodah Shmuel just said, is 3 kabim of planting, which is a certain amount of grapes. It doesn't say how much, but 3 kabim of planting. Reb Yossi, now says Reb Yossi, ain't elo divrei neviut. I don't, it's a little debatable how to understand Reb Yossi, but I'm going to say the simple shot is that, what are you talking about? You're making up things, basically. You're like, you're not being logical, you're being prophetic, meaning where in the world did you come up? Who decided that 3 kabim would be the shear? Others understand this the opposite. He was praising him. He was saying, this is like, what you said is like from God's mouth, meaning this is the dogma, that it's that mouth. Bavel, now what's the shear in Bavel? Again, we always assume Bavel, interestingly, is a little bit less than Eretz Yisrael, even though the other way we think of Bavel as having great produce, but here they think of it as being less. Amar Rava Bar Kasna, it's talking about a Bar Kasna Tlat Atzitzda, right? It's talking about you have Amar Rava Bar Kasna. It's talking about Tlat Atzitzda.
Isn't that his name?
Yeah,
Rava Bar Kisna?
Says Rava Bar Kisna. Yes, that's correct. Rava Bar Kisna said, Tlat Atzita, you 3 atzita, which are a section in a vineyard, like a standard size, that are b'nei tresar gufni. Each one has 12 grapes. So they would have sections in a vineyard, I don't know what words we would use, that are 12 grapes. So it's a cluster, not a cluster of grapes, but a cluster of vines, 12 vines. You have to have 3 of those. So essentially 36 vines. But I guess they would plant in ways that you would put a bunch together and then maybe have a separation to drive the truck through and then put another bunch together. So 3 bunches of 12 grapes, 3 sections of 12 grapes. And the reason for that is kihecha de rafik gavra biyuma. That's the amount that a person can hoe, rafik means to hoe, to weed, in 1 day. So basically, that's the amount of work it would take a professional 1 day in a vineyard. And again, this is all based on what's economically feasible. So you need a portion that's worthwhile to hire the professionals to do a good job, and that's 1 day's worth of work. Now, we get a little bit sidetracked, which is always fun. Says the Gemara of Avdimi bin Haifa, Avdimi min Haifa, which is an unusual place for Amora to be from. Atan, I'm sorry. Miyom shecharav Beit HaMikdash, from the day that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and this is referring to the first Beit HaMikdash, of course. Nitla nivua min haneviim. The capability of prophecy was taken from the people who were prophets. V'nitnum l'chachamim, and was given over to the sages. This is what I mean, is given over to the sages. Atu chacham lav navihu. Who's a sage could be a navi also. No, that's not what we mean. We mean, even though prophecy was taken away from those who previously had been merited it, who were prophets, meaning the standard way of becoming a prophet, like Shmuel talks about, the schools for the prophets no longer work. They can graduate anybody. The capability of prophecy, maybe not exactly neviut, but the capability of knowing facts that were I wouldn't say supernatural, but above knowledge, was left with the chachamim. Amar Amimar, it says Amimar v'chacham adif minavi. In fact, the chacham is a higher position, whoever's ranking these people, than a navi. Shenemar, because the pasuk says the navi levav chachma, that a navi has a heart like a chacham, basically, meaning that he's like a chacham. Mean it's labami, right? Who do you say is like someone else? Havi omer katan, it's labigadol. You say about something that's not quite there, it's like something greater. So therefore, by the fact that the pasuk said that a navi is like a chacham, it shows you that chacham is more distinguished than a navi. Amar Abaya, now says Abaya, I can prove to you that chachamim have prophecy. And again, prophecy does not mean obviously what we think about when you say Hosea. It means that they have the ability to discern things that are otherwise thought to be incapable of discernment, right? Divine knowledge or something. And what's the proof, says Abaya? To Amar Gava Rabba Milta, sometimes you'll have a great Tana who'll say a halacha, will come up and give a speech and say something, a drasha in the Torah and a limud that's very nice. And then you'll hear that someone else, somewhere else, said the exact same thing. So how they both come to the same knowledge, it must be that they have divine inspiration and that they were both divinely inspired, right? You'll hear the exact same thing quoted from someone else who has no contact with him. This was obviously pre-internet and Twitter, right? So there was no way to get information from one to the other. And you hear 2 people saying the exact same innovation. How in the world could they have said that unless they had some divine inspiration? Rava says, Rava, I'm not as convinced. My kushya, why is that so special? And I get it. These people are probably the same mazel. What we mean by the same mazel is that, they're from the same cultural milieu, right? They grew up in the same place. They had the same teachers. They had the same education. Their minds think alike. So it's such a big chiddush that they're going to come up with the same idea, right? They're using the same.
So why not say this as we learn in they're born under the same constellation, the same period of time, Pisces or
And therefore what? But what does that mean? Therefore what? They can think of the same thing?
could be. I mean, we say that Pisces think certain ways and Virgo a certain way. So they have this same. That's what when we talk about Mazo in Torah, it often means this.
I think what I'm saying is the same thing as what you're saying, to be honest with you, but it's different ways to express it. But I'm doing it in a more rational way. But I don't disagree with you. That it is true that that's how they structured it, but that's what we think of as person psychology, is their mazel, right? So certain people in certain times of year and certain I don't think I think it's less to do with what you're born under and more to do with what you're nurtured, but that's my philosophy. But you go to the same.
Astrology is Babylonian paganism.
So that is, but either way, let's just go with Rava here, that it's not so crazy, says Rava, that two people who have either the same sign of Pisces or the same cultural milieu and the same education will come up with the same idea independently. They're thinking the same way. So
Well,
that
it's actually happens a lot where for instance, you have two scientists working completely independently who don't even know that each other exists, come up with the same answer to a problem.
right.
This
Well,
happens quite frequently.
So that's Abaya's proof, right? Abaya didn't say a rabbi; he said Gavra Rabba, right? That could very well mean scientist. But says El Amar Rava, says Rava, I can prove it to you. Teda, Damar Gav Rabba Milta. What sometimes happens is not two scientists or two Rabbanan in the same generation. It's one person in 2024, and then you find a textbook from 1,000 years ago where someone said the exact same thing, and you didn't know about it. Umit Amra, the Gemara's version of that, is that you find out that it was said, Mishmei, Rabbi Akiva bar Yosef Kavate, right? We find that Rabbi Akiva, who obviously we hold up as being in his own league, said the same thing. And clearly it means you didn't read it, right? So how in the world could you, a regular person, think of something Rabbi Akiva said? It must be that there's nevuah, and that you got this message from God, or you scientists.
That happened to me once. I once asked a question in Shir, and the rabbi giving the Shir said, Rashi asked the same question. I didn't know that.
You got Charlie, you got Ruach HaKodesh there.
All right.
Says Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi in the top line now, my kushya, well, that's not such a big question. To say that you once thought of something Rabbi Akiva thought of does not mean you're Rabbi Akiva, right? It's like saying, I had an idea that Euclides had that makes me as great as him. I can have one idea that he had a billion of, right? That's my reading again here. Amar Rav Ashi, my kushya, Dilma the Milta bar Maslehu. For one thing, you and Rabbi Akiva are similar. Doesn't mean you're Rabbi Akiva. El Amar Rav Ashi, you know how I prove it, says Rav Ashi? Teda, to Amar Gav Rabba Milta, sometimes someone will say something, and then we'll find out later that it's a halacha Moshe Sinai, right? Now, halacha Moshe Sinai, there's no mazel there, right? We assume it's a principle given by God. You can't share that with God. So, mit Amra halacha Moshe Sinai kavate. How in the world did you think of something that only God told Moshe and you never heard before? It must be that you have connection through neviut to God. Says Gemara, well, everyone gets lucky sometimes. Dilma kasuma baruba. Maybe it's like a blind person walking on the floor. You feel around. You once in a while get lucky. You stub in the right place. Says Gemara, no. Lav tamya. It's talking about you gave a reason. You said this should be the halacha because of this reason. You weren't just randomly saying, "Don't jump in the water. Don't do that." And therefore, you see that there are times where chachamim, or as Charlie would put it, great scientists might have access to nivuah. Continues the Gemara, though, it gets better. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, 6 lines from the top, Yom Shecharav Beit HaMikdash, from the time of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, when we no longer have formalized nivuah, nitla nivuah min ha-nevi'im, v'nitna l'shotim l'tinokot. It was given to those who are shotim. I don't really know how to translate shotim. No,
fools.
Shotim means, we say fools, but I don't think that's, people who are not intellectually intact, we'll call it, and tinokot. And
deranged.
Yeah, but and again, Chazal meant many different things by shotim, but their knowledge of mental illness was different terms than we use, right? But clearly, people who are not thinking clearly, not linear thinking, let's put it that way, and tinokot, and to little kids, okay? Meaning, what that means is that we believe that sometimes, I'm sure not always, a child will blurt out something that is in fact a prophecy. Now, it doesn't mean everything a child says is a prophecy, and everything that a shotet says is a prophecy, but there is such a capability to people sometimes just to say things that are inspired by, I don't know why they say it, and turns out that they're in fact true. And we're going to bring some examples. Mishoti Mahi. What's an example of a shota? He had the Mar Bar Ravashi. There was a story of Mar Bar Ravashi, the Havikoi Beristika de Mechuza. He was sitting out in the Ristika, and we've had Ristika many times. It was the big public square, the Shuk in Mechuza. And he's sitting there and he hears some people walking by him, not talking to him. He said, there's a guy walking around with mental illness who's muttering to himself. It's like 42nd Street. Shamei lahu shota. He hears a shota. The Kamar Reish Metifta de Malach Mata Mechasya. There's going to be a new Reish Metifta. There's going to be a new Rosh Hashiva in Mata Mechasya. And Tuvyume Chatim. He signs his name Tivyume. Tivyume is like a nice name. You know, Tivyume literally means a good name or something like that. Tav Yome, today's a good day, right? Literally what it means. But he would sign his name that way. Now, Mar Bar Ravashi said to himself, wait a second. That's how I sign my name. And this guy doesn't know me. I don't know anything about this, but it clearly sounds like there's a new position opening up in Mata Mechasya, right? Man chatim tivyumi b'Rabbanan. Who among the rabbis signs their name tivyumi? Ana, it's me. Shmamina lididi kamili shaita. So he listened to these words of the shoteh. He took these words of a guy who clearly has no idea what he's talking about, babbling away, and he said, this is a divine signal that I should run to Mata Mechasya and put my hat in the ring to be the Rosh Hashiva, right? I wouldn't advise you listening to everything you hear, but this is something he listened to. So, come ata, adait, come ata. So he got up and he traveled to Mata Mechasya. Now, of course, the train was very slow, so it took him a long time to get to Mata Mechasya. And ada ata, by the time he got there, imnu Rabbanan, the Rabbanan had started taking a vote, and they had decided laotzvei the Rav Achami Difti Beresha. They decided to appoint Rav Achami Difti as their new Rosh Hashiva. For whatever reason, Mar Bar Ravashi did not get in consideration. Maybe no one thought about him or thought he would come or whatever the reason was. You know, everyone who's done a search for a new Rosh Hashiva knows it's always hard to know who's interested. And they had decided to appoint Rav Achami Difti. So now, but as the vote's going on, it's not a vote, but as the discussion's going on, they get news, oh my gosh, in the train station or in downtown is showing up Mar Bar Ravashi, who's a great man. So they said, let's go ask Mar Bar Ravashi to tell us whether it's a good idea to appoint Rav Achami Difti. Right? This is what they do when they put you on the search committee because they don't want to appoint you, right? So they basically said to Mar Bar Ravashi, tell us what you think about Rav Achami Difti. So Kivan Deshama Da'ata, when they heard that Mar Bar Ravashi came, Shadar Zuga Drabanan Legabe Lemuchibe. They sent a pair of rabbis to go to Mar Bar Ravashi's, Achsanyat, his hotel, to ask him whether it was a good idea to appoint Rav Achami Difti. Now, he thought, of course, it would be bad for him to say to them, Rav Achami Difti is a nice guy, but I got a better candidate for you. So he did it in a very smart way. He basically delayed them. So he sat them down, started feeding them, talking to them, and he never let them get to their point. So an hour passes, and they're sitting there, and they're waiting to go home, right, discussing. So they send another pair of students. Hadar Shadar Zuga Drabanan Achrini. Right, we've seen this case many times before, right? They send another pair of students. And Ikve, again, Mar Bar Ravashi kept them along with him. Ikva Gabe, Adamola Be'asara, until there were 10 students who had showed up. So now he had a Beit Midrash all by himself. Once there were 10 students, he got up and said, okay, let me give you a shir. And basically, he made himself the new Rosh Hashiva. Even the Mala Be'asara, once there were 10 people there, Patahu, Vitana, he got up and he started teaching the Darash, and he started, telling halachot as someone who's a Rosh Hashiva, or a Reish Metifta, as they put it there. L'fi she'ein darshin, ein potrim b'kala pachut me'asara. Right? No self-respecting Reish Metifta would get up and start giving a speech if there weren't 10 people there. So he had to wait for there to be a crowd. Otherwise, he's just some guy giving a speech. But once there's a crowd, he now becomes a Rosh Hashiva. And so he basically made, as they say, facts on the ground. And he established the yeshiva around himself. Kari Be'Ravacha, Nafshin, Ravacha heard about this. And Ravacha said, I'm toast, right? Kol HaMari'in, we had this Gemara, remember, at the end of Bava Kama, anyone who something bad starts happening to him, lo behemra nativin lo. You don't recover from that quickly. When your mazel is on the way out, as Haman learned, right? Your mazel is going down. Anyone who gets a good thing happens to him, lo behemra meri'in lo, it won't quickly become bad. And so basically, Mar Bar Ravashi engineered becoming the Reish Metifta because he heard this ridiculous comment from a shota on the street. And so you see that Mar Bar Ravashi believes that there's sometimes, I guess in the right context, validity and niviut in what a shota says. Again, not all the time, but sometimes. Tinoket, now what's the case of a kid where you get an example where a kid said something that turned out to be accurate, maihi, and that's the Batra of Chisda, a little closer to home. The daughter of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda had a daughter, Havi Yatva Bekan Avua. sitting in his lap because he was giving a shir and she wanted to listen to Daf Yomi, right? And Aviyatvi Kamei Rabba of Rami Bar Chama. Two of his students were sitting in front of him, Rabba and Rami Bar Chama. And Rav Chisda said to his daughter, maybe jokingly, maybe not, Amarla, man minayo bait. Which of these ones do you want to marry? Which of these students do you want in your day? I guess that was how it was done back then. And she, very cleverly, this young child, that doesn't say how old she was, let's say she was 5, we're going to give her. Amra le tirvayo. I want to marry both. And that's what happened. So it turned out that she ended up marrying both. And so you see from here that even sometimes children will say silly things and it will be true. Again, obviously it's not true every time a child says a silly thing is true. So she married one, divorced the other. And Rava was smart enough to realize what that meant. And Rava said, Anna Batra, I want to be second. Right? Meaning, because the first one's either going to die or get divorced. I want to be the last husband she has, not the first husband. So, but you see again from these stories that there are times, again, how exactly you make meaning of this. Rami Bar Chama clearly did, just to be clear. He heard something and he acted on it. And Rava, I guess, did the same thing. Rava heard it and acted on it too and said, I'll go second. Anyways, that is obviously a sidebar. Back to our, well, not actually back. We've got a couple more things to say from Rav Dimi Dimin Haifa, because we don't get him that often. Just one more. Amar Rav Dimi Dimin Haifa. Before a person eats and drinks in the morning, he has 2 hearts, meaning it's really hard to commit to anything. You're indecisive. It's hard to concentrate because you didn't drink yet. You have your big meal. Then you could think clearly. You have one leiv. That's a good thing. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, ish navuv yilaviv. The person who's navuv, which we hear means hollow, so he didn't eat yet, he yilavev, has many hearts. And then it says nivuv.
It's kind of interesting though, because you're not supposed to be eating before you daven. So does it mean that during the time that you're davening, you're not all together with it?
So it could be. It could also, yes, this is short answer, but it could also be that obviously you need different kinds. Maybe this is talking more about different way of thinking, right? Your lave, Rashi, lavuv literally means you've got different ways of thinking. Maybe it's a good thing during davening to have multiple perspectives, but when you're doing halakha, it's probably not a good thing, right?
Well, Miriam, your point is well taken, and that's why the Hasidim eat before davening. Most of the rest of us don't.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, but it is a good point. Amar Rav Huna bar Yeshua, the last I got it that we're going to have before we get back to our Mishnah. Haragil biyayin, a person who drinks a lot of wine, afilu libo atum kibetula, even if his heart is as closed to the world like a virgin, meaning it's never been accessed, no one's ever opened up his heart and gotten in there. Yayin mifakcho, the wine will open him up. Shenemar v'tirosh Yinuvav bitulot. Tirosh, wine, will open up even bitulot, even those who are virginal and have no exposure, no access to the world, never connected to anyone. Wine will help them do that, which is a good thing. Of course, wine has a lot of negative things too, and that is not today's sugya. It says, let's get a little bit back to Batra in our last 6 minutes here. Amar Rav Huna, Breder of Yeshua, we are around 20 lines from the bottom. It says Rav Huna, Breder of Yeshua, this gets to
in Barchi Nafshi today.
That's true. We had in Brachi Nafshi today, correct. Or some will have it, some did have it already. So now, the Mishnah, remember, talked about splitting up a field. If you recall, at the end of Bava Mitzvah, we had a lot of discussion about this concept of bar mitzvah, right? Someone who has a border next to the field. And it's very relevant, right? Let's say a man dies and he leaves his sons 2 fields, and one of them owns another field that's adjacent to one of the fields. So he presumably could say, I want the side, I want to split 50-50, but I want the half that's next to my field. That's bar mitzvah. So says the Gemara, it's obvious to us, Pshita, I'm Rav Yuna, Breder of Yeshua, Pshita, that if a person is a Bechor who gets 2 portions, he can demand that his 2 portions are together. Right? You can't say to him, okay, there's a Bechor and 5 other sons, meaning that there's 6 children and 7 portions, and everyone gets by lottery 1 of the 7 portions. You get 2 of the 7, right? He can demand and say, my Bechor is 2 portions. I get 2 next to each other. So Pshita, it's obvious to us that chelik Bechor v'chelik pashut yavinalei, that you give him his pashut portion, meaning his regular son portion, and his Bechor portion next to each other, achad mitzvah, right, on one boundary. But what about a Yavam? Remember, Yavam is a brother. Reuven marries Shimon. Shimon dies without children. Reuven marries Shimon's wife. One of the things that Reuven gets, besides Shimon's wife, is the portion that Shimon would get. So when the father dies, Reuven gets 2 portions. He gets his portion, assuming he's not a Bechor, and he gets Shimon's portion. Are those considered to be one double portion, and therefore it should be together, or two single portions. Does he get his portion and Shimon's portion? So you do a lottery and you give him whatever he would have gotten. So it says the Gemara, Biyavam Mai, and Amar Baya Hihi. It's the exact same thing. He's like a Bechor. In my time, and Bechor Kai Rachman. The Torah says he's like a Bechor. Rava says, no, it's wrong. Haya Amar Kra. He's treated like a Bechar, but he's not, in fact, like a Bechar, meaning his reputation, his approach is like a Bechar. The ein chalukato Bechar, but he doesn't get a portion like a Bechar, and in fact, he has no right to demand it. So if there's 7 portions and he gets 2, one for him and one for his brother, he just gets 2 sort of random portions within that field. Now, Ahu, Zavan Ara,
But he's not the brother, the first one who died, may not necessarily be the Bechor, right? And the Yavam may not be replacing.
Right, that's what I said. I'm assuming they're not Bechor. Let's say there's no Bechor here. Right, so he just gets 2 portions. Reuven gets a portion because he's a son. Shimon gets a portion because he was a son. Shimon's dead, but Reuven now gets his portion. So Reuven gets a double portion, not as a Bechor, but as a Yavam.
Uh-huh.
Now, Ahud Zavan Ara Mitzvah de Beinashia. There was a guy who bought land on the border of his father's property. That's how Rashi reads it. It's a little forced, but that's how, maybe that's how Tosfos reads it. Hold on. Let me read
I don't
Rashi.
think that's Rashi. Is that Rashi? Kind of Eitzel Sadeh Aviv.
Yeah, that is how Rashi reads it. I was right. So that's not how Tosfos reads it, but that's how Rashi reads it. Rashi usually means your father-in-law, right? Which would make a little bit more sense. But Rashi says your father. So meaning the father owned a plot of land. The son bought a plot of land next to it. Then the father died. So this son says, I would like my portion to be next to my existing land, right? Which makes a little bit of sense. Shimon, the other brother, says, I don't know. Why should you get it? Let's just have a lottery, right? Like we normally would have. So let's read it inside. He bought land on the border of his father's property. Kikapolgo, when his father died and they're splitting up his father's land, Amalei said, Pligo li Mitzray. I would like to have my property on my border. So I have one space. Amar Rabba said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. This is the kind of case where, technically halacha is you split it up, but it's midat stone, meaning zen and chaser. You don't lose anything by giving him that space, and he gains by getting that space because it's next to his other space. And so we would force the other brothers to give him on the border of his existing land.
Why is that midat Sodom?
Because that's what I just said. Zen and chaser is what we call midat Sodom, where one person gains and the other person does not lose. Right? So you're getting an equal portion. So you have no loss by not getting this property, but you don't get any gain, but the other one can gain from doing it. So that's called midat Sodom, that it would be just considered to be, right, no reason to just be cruel to someone. Matifla Rav Yosef, said Rav Yosef, Amri la'achi malin le'alei be'nichsei de'be bar Miriam. The brothers can say to him, what are you talking about? We value this. We value that field as if, and there's a little bit of debate what they mean exactly here, but let's just say simply, we value it as if it's the Bay Miriam. Remember, Bay Miriam was the fanciest, most beautiful field in all of Eretz Yisrael, right? So they said, we actually can say, we want that portion. So even though it's not, and again, it has to be the same value. Remember, they split up based on value. So if one field is worth more, then it wouldn't be considered to be an equal portion. But even if they're all worth the same, there are subjective things that go into what field you want. I want to be on the top of the hill. I want to be on the bottom of the hill. I want to see the trees. I want to see the lake. You know what I mean? Everyone, it's completely subjective. And so the brothers can go and say, we want that property. I know it's on your border, but there's subjective things that make us want it. And therefore, we don't want you to get it. And says the Gemara, but that's wrong. The Hilchata, I think it's wrong. No, that's right. Sorry. Hilchata Rav Yosef. In fact, that's the halacha, like Rav Yosef, that the brothers can say, we don't want to give it to you because there's something subjective about it that we like. Amar Trey Ara, a Trey Nagri. Now, let's say you have 2 pieces of land on 2 water sources. Nagri are like irrigation ditches, right? So there's 2 irrigation ditches, one, let's say, on either side of the land. Imagine a rectangle. There's one on the right and one on the left. And there's 2 pieces of land, right? So it makes sense. You split up. Each piece of land gets 1 irrigation ditch. So you get the right side of the field, it's an irrigation ditch, and the left side with its irrigation ditch. That's what they want. So let's say you have, let me read inside, Trey Arata, a Trey Nagri, 2 pieces of land with 2 irrigation ditches. Amar Rabba, midat Sodom. Here, if one brother says, I would like the one on the east or the one on the west, because it's next to my other field, then, and there's benefit for me, and there's no loss for you, because you're going to get a field and an irrigation ditch, and therefore there's no negative for you. So give me the one I want. So you can force him. Why
is that being cruel?
Because the other brother is saying, I don't want to split it up that way. I want to split it up a different way. So again,
I mean, they have a disagreement, but why is it saying, why is it been Midat Sodom? Why is it cruel?
because Zen and Nev is lo chaser. Because in theory, you have nothing to lose. The brother who doesn't want to split it up the way the first brother wants, he says, "I want." Again, let me just explain this mentally. Maybe hopefully it'll help. It's a rectangle, okay? And on one side is a irrigation ditch, and on the left side is an irrigation ditch. And so brother A says, "I want half the field and the irrigation ditch, which is next to my field, which is on the other side." The other brother says, "I want to split it the other way. I want to split it rectangularly so that I get a long field with two irrigation ditches, and you get a long field with two irrigation ditches, right? So do it widthwise." So first we thought to say that the first brother is doing the right thing. He's saying, look, I want it next to my field. You're going to still have a field with an irrigation ditch. You have nothing to lose. You can't you should be able to force that brother to give over the division that way, right? And that's Kofin Amidat Sodom. Asked Rav Yosef now 5 lines from the bottom, not Rav Yosef, how could that be? Maybe it's not true because Zimnin, there are times the high midvil, the high low midvil, that one ditch you can draw water from, one irrigation area, and one you can't, meaning it's always good to have a water backup, right? And therefore, the second brother can say, I know it's next to your field and you want that whole section, but I really want access to both irrigation ditches. And therefore, I want to divide it a different way. That's less convenient for you because you can't rely, one water source is not enough. Sometimes one will draw and one will not draw. And that, in fact, is the halakha, Hilchata Rav Yosef, that in fact you can do it. I'm going to do one more if that's okay. Should we do one more? Charlie says yes. Now, the next case is, let's say you have two people on one nagra. Tarti fields, it probably should say. Let's see what Tarti arata, two fields, achad nagra. With one nagra, and the nagra is the irrigation space, right? So now, in this case, the way you split it up depends on who gets access to the water, right? It could be very, very influential about who gets access to that water, right? So let me just do it this way. There's two fields, right? And there's one water source, meaning they both share it along the way, okay? And what Rashi points out is that, I'm going to use names here, Reuven and Shimon. So one brother bought a plot of land on the east side of this field, okay? So on the east, brother Reuven owns a land. And now there's two fields that have to be split, that the father died and left over. So Reuven says, look, I would like the field on the east side that's next to my field. And both of the fields are on the same irrigation ditch. So no one's going to get benefit, meaning by getting a field on the east or the west, you get the same access to water. So there, Reuven comes to Shimon and says, look, I want the east field. It's next to my existing field. There's no loss to you in me getting that field because your field is still going to have access to water. I want you to give it to me. Instead of you taking the field in the east, which is now the middle field, and letting me be on either end of you, right? I'll be on your east and on your west if you take the middle field. So Reuven comes to Shimon and says, Tarti achad nagra, Amar Rav Yosef kigonzeh kofina midat Sodom. Reuven can force Shimon to give him the field that's next to his field. Matkif l'Rabaya, to Rabaya, I don't agree with that either. Because Shimon can still claim he'd rather get the middle field, not the outside field. Why? Because Matzi Amri could say, you know what would be really nice for me, said Shimon, if you have fields on both sides of me. Because if you, Reuven, my dear brother, have fields on both sides of me, it means that in order to work your fields, you're going to have to hire two separate crews of people, right? Because they can't travel from field to field, which of course is why you want your fields next to each other. But if you have two separate crews of people on your fields, that's really nice for me because it means I'm surrounded by people. No one's going to come steal my property. No one's going to come mess with my animals. I'll read that inside. Be'ina ta'fishi arisi. I want there to be a lot of workers there. And so therefore, I actually benefit from your suffering, right? By you making you have to have two fields that are not conjoined together because you have more workers. You'll have to hire more workers. And I want more people around my field. So therefore, I could say, I want to be in between your fields. And says the Gemara, that's wrong, though. The Hilchata Rav Yosef, the halacha is like the first opinion, like Rav Yosef, because Afushi Arise Lav Miltahi. That's not a strong argument to say that I want you to have more workers. That's just essentially cruelty. Because essentially what I'm saying is I want you to pay extra so that I get extra shmira. And that argument doesn't hold water, so to speak. But
so he's forcing him to spend more money.
It is, but the counter argument is it's a Yerusha. It should be be random. Right? Doesn't matter, that's wrong, because since basically in order for Shimon to benefit, Reuven would have to spend more money, as you just put it. That's not saying that it would be unequal, it'd be equal for Reuven to get one or the other. And therefore, Reuven can say, I want the field next to mine, so I get the two fields on the east, and you get the field on the west. Everyone's got access to water, everyone's happy, and I think we're going to stop there, even though
But we were saying that the first opinion where he says, I want the east, that's Midat Sodom. So that's
Right.
being cruel, right? So, but
So
now we
that's-
say, but now if you say taking opposite
That's-
approach, that the second brother wants to force him to take the two workers, we said that's being cruel. So which is
Right.
more cruel?
So it's more cruel to require the brother to hire extra workers, and if you're not getting anything out of it, physically, monetarily. The earlier point that we made is that if there's other things that you can gain, I mean, if you can say, I subjectively enjoy this field more, or if you can say that there's a water source in that field that I'm going to lose access to, and even if it's a backup water source, then you can't force him to give him that portion. Then you go randomly. But if there's absolutely nothing to gain except for this final argument that, oh, I want you to have a field on both sides of me because then it means I get better protection, that's not considered to be a good argument. And we don't paskin that you can force him to give you the field or to split the field randomly by a goral. You can force him to get the field on his border. Tomorrow we're
No,
going
no,
to
no.
get
He's the
beautiful
one who
pictures
wants
in
the
Rush.
border. He's forcing, right? He the one who takes it, and he wants it on his border. He's forcing the person to do something else, his brother. It's not that what we're forcing him to take it on the border, right?
Correct. He's forcing his brother to give him the portion on the border. And he's allowed to do that because the consequences are that substantial.
Even though that we said that's a midat Sodom.
No, we said for the brother to not do it would be Midat Sodom. That's why we force him. We force Shimon to give Reuven.
No, it says at the beginning, the first one Kagon, Zeh, Kofi al midat Sodom.
Right, so
And
you
then
force-
Mashkik Lev Abba.
So Kofi al Midat Sodom means you force Shimon to give Reuven the field because for
Next to
Shimon,
him.
you force Shimon to give Reuven the field. Reuven's the one who is the border. You force Shimon to give Reuven the field that he wants because if Shimon didn't give it, that's called Midat Sodom. So you force Shimon to do it. The question was, but why can't Shimon say, I would prefer not to give it to him because if I was in the middle, I would have protection on both sides. And we said that's not a legitimate argument because it just means that Reuven's going to have to spend extra for having two fields for you to get extra protection. That's not something Reuven would have to do. And so we force Shimon, Amidat Sodom, to give Reuven the field on his border. Tomorrow,
in the first case, Rambam, according to Steinsaltz, Rambam had a version of text that did not have Hilchata to Robert Yosef.
yeah, if you look on the Amish spot, you see how they paskin like both. You see how there's little numbers on both of them.
Yeah.
One's the Rambam, one's a Shulchan Aruch. Yeah. Tomorrow we will do the top line, which I'm sorry we didn't get to, but you have pictures in Rashi, which are very exciting pictures. So stay tuned for the drawings. I wish we had drawings for this, but you'll get them tomorrow.
Yeah, the
Chodesh Tov,
Koran has
everyone.
drawings.
Chodesh Tov, Shavua
Chodesh
Tov.
Tov, Shavua Tov.
Thank you all.
Chodesh Tov. Thank you.
and you just put it in there, just in one movement. Oh, there's and what's the debate nashe? The Nashe.